My husband cheated with our babysitter, and I caught them on camera.
Hey Reddit, I'm Emma, 34, and I've just been through the most devastating experience of my life. I thought my marriage was rock solid, and my husband, Mike, 36, was my best friend and partner. We have 2 beautiful kids, and I trusted him completely until I found out he was cheating on me with our 22-year-old babysitter, Jessica.
And the worst part? I caught it all on camera.
Here's the story of how I uncovered the truth and how it turned my world upside down.
Mike and I met 12 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding.
He was the best man, and I was a bridesmaid. From the moment we locked eyes, there was an undeniable spark. Mike was charming, funny, and full of life, the kind of guy who could light up a room with his presence. We danced, laughed, and by the end of the night, I knew there was something special between us.
Falling in love and building a life together. After that night, we were inseparable.
We started dating, and everything felt like a whirlwind romance straight out of a movie. Mike was attentive, always planning romantic dates and showering me with affection. He'd surprise me with flowers at work, leave sweet notes in my car, and call me every night just to say he missed me.
I felt like the luckiest woman in the world.
We got married 2 years later in a beautiful beachside ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Mike held my hand tightly as we exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life threw our way. I believed every word he said, and in those moments, I couldn't imagine a life without him. Our honeymoon was in the Bahamas, and it felt like the perfect start to our married life.
We spent days lounging on the beach, exploring local markets, and indulging in too many cocktails.
I remember looking at Mike and feeling so overwhelmed with love, thinking, this is my forever. We made promises to always communicate, always support each other, and never take each other for granted. They were promises I held on to, even as things began to change. We bought a cozy house in the suburbs and started building our dream life together. Mike worked as a project manager at a construction company, and I was a graphic designer. We were both driven and ambitious, but we always made time for each other.
We spent weekends exploring new restaurants, hiking trails, and hosting barbecues for our friends.
It felt like the perfect balance of love, work, and fun. A few years into our marriage, we welcomed our first child, Sophie. She was our little miracle, and I remember feeling overwhelmed with joy the moment I held her in my arms. Mike was the proudest dad, constantly doting on her and talking about all the things he wanted to teach her. 2 years later, we had our second child, Ben, and our family felt complete.
The busy life of parenthood.
Life with 2 young kids was chaotic but filled with love.
Mike and I worked hard to give our children the best life possible.
We were the kind of parents who were always at every soccer game, school play, and parent-teacher conference. Our lives revolved around our kids, and while it was exhausting at times, it was also incredibly fulfilling. Mike was a hands-on dad, always involved in bath time, bedtime stories, and Saturday morning pancake breakfasts. He'd take the kids to the park, help with homework, and always made sure they felt loved. Watching him with our children made me fall even more in love with him. He was the partner I'd always dreamed of, caring, supportive, and dependable.
But as our responsibilities grew, so did the demands on our time. Mike started working longer hours, often coming home late and exhausted.
I was juggling my job, the kids, and the household, and there were nights when we barely spoke beyond a quick, "How was your day?" We were both running on empty, and though we were still a team, the cracks in our relationship were starting to show. We rarely had time for date nights or weekends away like we used to. The intimacy that had once defined our relationship was fading, replaced by the routine of everyday life. I tried to initiate conversations about how we could reconnect, suggesting couples therapy, planning a weekend getaway, or even just a night out together, but Mike always brushed it off.
"We're fine, Emma," he'd say with a reassuring smile. "It's just a busy time. We'll get back to us soon." I wanted to believe him, so I did.
I told myself that every couple went through rough patches, and this was just one of ours. I clung to the hope that things would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other. But as the weeks turned into months, the distance between us only grew.
Hiring the babysitter, Jessica enters the picture.
As Mike's work hours got longer and my workload increased, we decided it was time to hire a babysitter to help with the kids. We needed someone reliable who could pick up Sophie and Ben from school, help with homework, and give us a little breathing room in our busy lives.
After interviewing a few candidates, we found Jessica.
Jessica was 22, a college student studying early childhood education, and she had an infectious energy that the kids adored. She was bubbly, responsible, and seemed genuinely interested in working with children. The kids took to her immediately, and she quickly became part of our routine.
Jessica was always on time, cheerful, and eager to help.
She'd play games with Sophie and Ben, cook them dinner, and tidy up the house before we got home. She even sent us cute pictures of the kids during the day, making forts in the living room or baking cookies in the kitchen.
It was a relief to have someone we could trust, and I was grateful for the extra help.
Jessica would often stay a little later when Mike was working late, which seemed like a blessing at the time. It meant I could finish up some work, catch up on errands, or just have a quiet moment to myself. I'd chat with her about her classes, her plans for the future, and occasionally, we'd have a glass of wine together after the kids were asleep. She felt more like a friend than an employee, and I appreciated having another adult around. Mike seemed to like Jessica too, often chatting with her when he got home from work.
They'd laugh about silly things the kids had done, and I didn't think anything of it. Jessica was young, sweet, and felt like a little sister to us. I never saw her as a threat, just a kid trying to make some extra money while going to school. But looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. As Jessica settled into her role, life seemed to get a bit easier. I had more time to focus on my work, and the kids were happy. But as the months went by, I started to notice small changes in Mike's behavior, little things that didn't quite add up but were easy to dismiss. Subtle changes in Mike's behavior.
Mike started coming home even later than usual, often with the excuse that he was swamped at work. He'd mumble something about a meeting running late or a last-minute project that needed his attention.
At first, I didn't question it.
I knew his job was demanding, and he was working hard to provide for our family.
But his late nights became more frequent, and I noticed other changes too.
He was more distant, often glued to his phone or lost in thought. He'd get home, give me a quick kiss on the cheek, and retreat to his office, saying he had more work to catch up on. Our once lively conversations had dwindled to short, surface-level exchanges, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mike also became more particular about his appearance. He started dressing nicer for work, investing in new suits, getting haircuts more frequently, and even splurging on expensive cologne. When I commented on it, he'd just shrug and say he wanted to look professional for his clients. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but it added to the growing sense of unease that I couldn't quite put my finger on.
There were other red flags, too.
Mike was spending a lot more time on his phone, often turning the screen away when I walked into the room. He'd laugh at messages, but when I'd ask what was so funny, he'd just say it was work-related and change the subject. He also became oddly protective of his phone, setting a new password and taking it everywhere with him, even into the bathroom. Once, when his phone buzzed in the middle of dinner, he quickly grabbed it and walked out of the room. When he returned, he brushed it off as a work emergency.
"Sorry, just something I had to deal with," he said, but his evasiveness left me feeling uneasy.
These moments began to pile up, and I found myself questioning everything. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I told myself that we were just in a rough patch, that the stress of work and parenthood was taking its toll on both of us.
I didn't want to believe that anything was seriously wrong, and I certainly didn't want to entertain the idea that Mike could be unfaithful. After all, we'd built a life together, surely he wouldn't throw it all away. The missing connection between us. Our intimacy, which had already been waning, completely disappeared. Mike would come to bed late, often after I'd already fallen asleep.
When I tried to initiate affection, he'd pull away, saying he was too tired or not in the mood.
I felt rejected and confused, but I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us.
I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering where we'd gone wrong. I replayed old memories in my mind, our wedding day, the birth of our children, the countless happy moments we'd shared. I clung to those memories like lifelines, hoping they'd remind me that what we had was real, even if it felt like it was slipping away.
I brought up my concerns to Mike one evening, trying to be gentle but honest.
"I miss us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
I feel like we're drifting apart, and I don't know how to fix it. Mike sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he stared at the floor. I'm just stressed, Emma. Work's been crazy, and I'm trying to keep everything together. It's not you, I promise. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded, forcing a smile. Okay, I said quietly. But I'm here if you need to talk. We hugged, but it felt hollow, like we were two strangers trying to recapture something that had long since faded. I didn't push the issue further, afraid that digging too deep would reveal something I wasn't ready to face. The kids' unusual comments. The kids adored Jessica, and she seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with them. But over time, Sophie and Ben started making comments that raised my suspicions. One day, Sophie casually mentioned that Daddy and Jessica were always whispering when they thought she wasn't looking. I brushed it off as childish exaggeration, but it stuck with me. Then, Ben said something that chilled me to the core. As we were driving home from school, he innocently told me, "Mommy, Jessica was sitting on Daddy's lap last week." They were laughing, and I told them to play with me, but they didn't. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked him to explain, but Ben had already moved on, talking excitedly about his new toy truck. I was left reeling, trying to make sense of what I just heard. There were other little moments, too. Sophie once told me that Daddy and Jessica were always having secret conversations, and Ben mentioned that Jessica called Daddy by his first name, which was unusual since she normally addressed him as Mr. Mike. These comments felt like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit, but I didn't know what picture they were forming. I wanted to confront Mike right then and there, but I didn't have any concrete proof, just the unsettling feeling that something was horribly wrong. I told myself that maybe the kids were just misinterpreting things, that there had to be an innocent explanation. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing faster than I could ignore. As time went on, I became increasingly paranoid. I was constantly on edge, analyzing every interaction between Mike and Jessica, looking for signs that my worst fears were true. I felt like I was losing my mind, torn between trusting my instincts and wanting to believe that Mike would never betray me. Setting up the camera. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty, constantly second-guessing myself. I had to find out if Mike was cheating, even if it meant facing the possibility that my entire world was about to crumble. The next day, I went online and ordered a small, discreet nanny cam. It was disguised as a digital clock, perfect for blending into any room without drawing attention. I felt a pang of guilt as I set it up in the living room, positioning it on a shelf where it had a clear view of the couch. It felt invasive and wrong, but I was desperate for answers. I told myself that this was just to ease my mind, that I'd see nothing out of the ordinary, and I could finally put my suspicions to rest. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for the worst. I set the camera to record during the hours when Jessica was watching the kids, and when Mike was home early from work, just to be safe. Watching the footage, the heartbreaking discovery. For the first few days, I couldn't bring myself to watch the footage. I was too scared of what I might see. But after a particularly tense night where Mike barely spoke to me, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I waited until everyone was asleep, then quietly slipped into the office and pulled up the recordings on my laptop. My heart pounded as I fast-forwarded through the first few hours. The kids were playing, Jessica was helping with homework, it all seemed perfectly normal. I felt a brief sense of relief, but I kept watching, needing to be sure. Then, my worst fears were confirmed. I watched in stunned silence as Jessica and Mike entered the frame, laughing and talking in hushed tones. Mike sat down on the couch, and Jessica sat next to him, closer than what seemed appropriate. At first, it looked innocent enough until Jessica leaned in and kissed him. I felt my stomach drop. I paused the video, my hands shaking as I struggled to process what I was seeing. But I forced myself to keep watching, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. It got worse. Mike didn't pull away, instead, he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer as they continued to kiss. Tears streamed down my face as I watched them, my heart shattering with each second that passed. They were completely wrapped up in each other, oblivious to the world around them. I watched them cuddle, whisper, and laugh, like they were lovers in the comfort of their own home, not in my living room, where our children played and where we were supposed to be a family. It wasn't just a one-time thing. As I continued to review the footage, I saw them together on multiple occasions, sneaking kisses, holding hands, and whispering when they thought no one was around. I saw them get up abruptly whenever they heard the kids nearby, like two guilty teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. On one occasion, I watched as Mike handed Jessica a small gift, a bracelet I recognized from a store we'd once visited together. She squealed with delight, throwing her arms around him as he grinned. It was a gesture so intimate, so personal, that it felt like a punch to the gut. He was giving her the kind of affection and attention that he hadn't given me in months. I slammed the laptop shut, feeling like I was going to be sick. Everything I'd feared was true, and the evidence was right in front of me. Mike was cheating on me with our babysitter, and they'd been carrying on their affair right under my nose. The pain of betrayal. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, my mind racing with a million thoughts. How could he do this to me? How long had it been going on? What did she have that I didn't? I felt humiliated, angry, and utterly heartbroken. I had trusted Mike with my heart, my life, and our children, and he'd thrown it all away for a fling with a younger woman. I sat in the bathroom, sobbing into a towel to muffle the sound. I didn't want to wake the kids or let Mike know that I knew. I needed time to figure out what to do next, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, laughing, kissing, betraying me in the most personal way possible. I replayed every moment in my mind, questioning everything I thought I knew. I thought about all the times Mike had told me he was working late, all the nights he'd come home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, and all the excuses he'd made that now seemed so flimsy. I felt like a fool for trusting him, for letting my guard down, and for believing that we were still the happy family I'd always wanted us to be. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. Mike was his usual self, getting ready for work and acting like everything was normal. I watched him carefully, trying to see him the way I had before, but all I could think about was the footage on my laptop. He was a stranger to me now, a man who had broken every promise he'd ever made. I could barely look at Jessica when she arrived to watch the kids. She greeted me with her usual bright smile, completely unaware that I knew her secret. I wanted to scream at her, to throw her out of my house, but I held back. I wasn't ready for the confrontation, not yet. I felt trapped in my own home, surrounded by reminders of the betrayal. Every corner of the house felt tainted, every piece of furniture a witness to the lies that had been unfolding behind my back. I couldn't even look at the couch without feeling a surge of anger and hurt. The place that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a prison. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to keep up the appearance of normalcy while secretly planning my next move. I knew I needed to confront Mike, but I was terrified of what would happen when I did. Would he lie? Would he try to blame me? I wasn't sure I was ready to hear whatever excuses he'd come up with. Gathering evidence and preparing for the confrontation. I spent hours replaying the footage, documenting every moment of their affair. I saved the videos, took screenshots, and made a detailed timeline of all the times Mike and Jessica had been together. I didn't want to leave any room for denial or manipulation. I needed undeniable proof that couldn't be explained away. I felt like a detective, piecing together the puzzle of their betrayal. I scoured bank statements, looking for suspicious charges, dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, gifts that I hadn't received. I checked his phone records, noting every late-night call and text to Jessica's number. Each discovery was like a knife to the heart, but it also steeled my resolve. I wasn't going to let Mike gaslight me into believing I was overreacting. Every time Mike came home, I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. I'd watch him kiss me hello, hold our children, and act like the loving husband and father he pretended to be. But I knew the truth, and it was eating me alive. I couldn't stand the sight of him, but I forced myself to stay calm, knowing that my moment would come. I reached out to my closest friend, Lisa, and confided in her about what I discovered. Lisa was furious on my behalf, offering to come over and help me kick Mike out that very night. "You deserve so much better than this, Emma," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "He's not worth your tears." Lisa's support gave me the strength I needed. We spent hours talking about how I would confront Mike, rehearsing what I would say and how I would keep my composure.
I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I wanted to confront him with the cold, hard truth and watch him squirm. I finally reached my breaking point one evening when Mike came home smelling of Jessica's perfume. I had smelled it on him before but brushed it off as a coincidence. This time, it was unmistakable. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I was done pretending everything was fine. The confrontation, unmasking the betrayal. I waited until the kids were in bed before confronting Mike. I sat on the couch, my laptop open with the videos paused on the screen. When he walked into the room, he looked surprised to see me waiting. "Hey, what's up?" he asked, smiling like nothing was wrong. I didn't answer. I simply turned the laptop around, pressing play on the footage. Mike's smile faded as he watched himself on the screen, sitting on the couch with Jessica, his arm around her as they kissed. He looked back at me, his face pale and panicked. "Emma, I can explain," he stammered, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Explain what, Mike?" I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. "Explain how you've been cheating on me with our babysitter? How you've been bringing her into our home and sneaking around like a coward." Mike's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. "It was a mistake," he said desperately. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It was stupid, and I'm so sorry. Please, Emma, just let me explain." I stood up, my hands trembling as I pointed at the screen. "You don't get to apologize," I yelled. "You don't get to pretend this was some harmless mistake. You betrayed me, Mike. You betrayed our family, and I will never forgive you for this." Mike fell to his knees, begging me to listen, but I was too angry to care. I told him how I'd suspected him for months, how I'd set up the camera and seen everything. I listed every time he'd lied to me, every time he'd let Jessica into our home, and every moment he'd spent destroying the trust we'd built. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I sobbed. "Do you even care that you've torn our family apart?" Mike tried to reach for me, but I backed away, my heart breaking all over again. "You need to leave," I said coldly. "I don't want you in this house. I don't want you near me or the kids. Get out." Mike pleaded with me, promising to end things with Jessica and begging for another chance. But I was done. I couldn't look at him without seeing the betrayal, without feeling the gut-wrenching pain of knowing he'd thrown everything away. I told him to pack a bag and go stay with a friend or at a hotel. I didn't care where, as long as it wasn't here. Cutting off Jessica. The next morning, I fired Jessica. I didn't give her the chance to explain or defend herself. I simply told her that I knew everything and that she was no longer welcome in our lives. She tried to apologize, saying it was a mistake and that she never meant to hurt me. But her words felt hollow, and I couldn't stand the sight of her. "You need to leave," I said firmly, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "And don't ever contact me or my family again." Jessica left, her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. She had played a part in tearing my family apart, and I wanted nothing more to do with her. I changed the locks on the house, blocked her number, and made it clear that she was never to come near us again. After kicking Mike out and cutting off Jessica, I was left to deal with the aftermath. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to move forward. Every day was a battle to keep it together for the sake of my kids, who were too young to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home. The emotional roller coaster of betrayal. I spent the first few weeks in a state of numbness. I'd go through the motions of my daily routine, getting the kids ready for school, going to work, and coming home to an empty house. But inside, I was drowning in pain. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't stop replaying the videos in my mind. I felt angry, hurt, and humiliated. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong, what I could have done differently to prevent this from happening. I blamed myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for trusting Mike when I should have been more vigilant. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't escape the truth. This wasn't my fault. Mike had made a choice, and that choice had shattered our family. I reached out to my best friend, Lisa, who had been my rock through everything. She listened as I poured out my heart, crying about the betrayal, the loss, and the uncertainty of my future. Lisa was furious on my behalf, offering to help in any way she could. "You don't deserve this, Emma," she said, hugging me tightly.
"Mike's an idiot, and you're going to get through this." My parents were also incredibly supportive.
They helped with the kids, cooked meals, and made sure I wasn't alone during those first few difficult weeks. My mom stayed with me on nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, holding my hand as I cried and reassuring me that I was stronger than I realized.
Deciding to file for divorce.
After weeks of soul-searching, I made the difficult decision to file for divorce.
Mike continued to call, text, and beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to take him back. I knew that if I stayed, I'd never be able to trust him again. Every time I looked at him, I'd see Jessica's face, and I couldn't live like that. I met with a lawyer, who walked me through the process of filing for divorce and establishing custody arrangements for the kids. It was overwhelming and emotionally draining, but I knew it was the right decision. I was taking control of my life, setting boundaries, and refusing to let Mike's betrayal define me. When I told Mike about the divorce, he was devastated. He pleaded with me to reconsider, saying he'd do anything to fix our marriage. But I was resolute.
I told him that while I didn't hate him, I couldn't continue living in a relationship built on lies.
I needed to focus on healing and creating a stable environment for Sophie and Ben.
Mike eventually accepted my decision, and we agreed to keep things civil for the sake of our children. He moved into a small apartment nearby, and we worked out a custody schedule that allowed him to stay involved in the kids' lives. It was painful, but it was necessary. I needed space to rebuild my life, and he needed to face the consequences of his actions.
Focusing on my kids and my own healing.
With Mike out of the house, I poured all my energy into being the best mom I could be. Sophie and Ben were my anchors, and I was determined to create a loving and stable environment for them, even if it meant doing it on my own. I signed them up for extracurricular activities, planned fun weekends, and made sure they knew that, no matter what, they were loved. I also started going to therapy, something I'd never done before. My therapist, Dr. Collins, helped me navigate the complex emotions I was experiencing: anger, grief, betrayal, and guilt.
She taught me that it was okay to feel broken, but that it didn't mean I was weak.
She encouraged me to set boundaries, practice self-care, and slowly rebuild my sense of self-worth.
Dr. Collins also helped me unpack the trauma of infidelity, showing me that Mike's actions were not a reflection of my value as a wife or a person.
He made a choice, she reminded me gently.
And his choices do not define you.
I took up running, using the early mornings as my time to clear my mind and release my pent-up emotions. I'd put on my headphones, blast my favorite music, and run until my lungs burned and my legs ached. It was a cathartic release, a way to reclaim my body and mind from the heaviness that had weighed me down. I also reconnected with my love of painting, turning my garage into a makeshift art studio. I'd spend hours at the easel, losing myself in colors and shapes that reflected my inner turmoil. My art became an outlet for the pain I couldn't put into words, and each brushstroke felt like a step toward healing. I began painting more frequently, creating pieces that expressed my journey through betrayal, loss, and the slow climb back to myself. I even held a small gallery showing with the support of my friends and family, displaying works that represented my heartache and resilience. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and it reminded me that my voice, my feelings, and my experiences mattered.
Rediscovering my strength and independence.
As the months went by, I slowly started to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. I made new friends, tried new hobbies, and began to rebuild my confidence. I learned to enjoy my own company, taking myself out for coffee, going to the movies, and embracing the freedom of being on my own. I started attending a local support group for women who had experienced infidelity, and it was incredibly validating to hear others share their stories. We laughed, cried, and cheered each other on as we navigated the ups and downs of rebuilding our lives. It was comforting to know that I wasn't alone, and that there was hope on the other side of betrayal. Through therapy, support, and self-discovery, I realized that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I was a loving mother, a talented artist, and a resilient woman who had survived the worst. I didn't need Mike to validate my worth, and I certainly didn't need his approval to move forward. I also learned to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I had trusted Mike because that's what you do in a marriage, you trust your partner. I had believed in our love, and there was no shame in that. I had been deceived, but I wasn't broken. I was whole, and I was determined to build a life that reflected the strength and resilience I had found within myself. Rebuilding my home and my future. With Mike gone, I decided to make some changes around the house to create a space that felt truly mine. I painted the walls, redecorated the living room, and turned the once shared office into a bright, inspiring art studio. I wanted my home to be a reflection of the new chapter one was entering, one filled with hope, creativity, and independence. I also focused on creating new memories with the kids. We took weekend trips to the beach, spent afternoons baking cookies, and even started a small vegetable garden in the backyard. I wanted them to feel safe, loved, and excited about the future, even if it looked different from what we'd once imagined. The kids adjusted to our new normal better than I'd expected. They missed having Mike at home, but they adapted to the new routine with resilience that amazed me. I made sure to keep the lines of communication open, answering their questions honestly while reassuring them that they were not to blame for anything that had happened. I also made sure to prioritize my own well-being. I scheduled regular self-care days, whether that meant a spa visit, a night out with friends, or simply curling up with a good book. I was learning to put myself first, something I hadn't done in years, and it felt empowering. As I continued to heal, I started to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. I was no longer defined by the betrayal I had experienced. I was defined by my resilience, my love for my children, and my determination to build a better life. Letting go of the past. One of the hardest parts of my healing journey was letting go of the anger I felt toward Mike. I'd spent months carrying the weight of his betrayal, replaying our confrontation in my mind and wishing things had been different. But holding on to that anger was only hurting me, and I knew I needed to release it in order to move forward. Through therapy, I learned to separate my feelings from my identity. I was allowed to be angry, but I didn't have to let that anger control me. I practiced forgiveness not for Mike's sake, but for my own. I forgave myself for loving him, for trusting him, and for believing in a future that would never come to be. I also forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I chose to focus on the good times we'd shared, to appreciate the love we'd once had, and to accept that people make mistakes. Mike had made his choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. I packed away the remnants of our life together, the wedding photos, the mementos from vacations, and the little notes we'd written each other over the years. It was painful, but it was also necessary. I was creating space for new memories, new beginnings, and a new version of myself that wasn't tethered to the past. Finding new love and embracing the future. As time went on, I started to open myself up to the possibility of new love. It wasn't something I rushed into. I was still healing, and I needed to make sure I was whole before sharing my life with someone else. But I began to dip my toes back into the dating world, cautiously meeting new people and rediscovering what it felt like to be seen and appreciated. I met a man named Alex, a kind-hearted chef with a passion for cooking and a gentle sense of humor. We met through a mutual friend, and from the moment we started talking, I felt a connection I hadn't felt in years. Alex was patient, understanding, and respectful of my boundaries. He knew about my past and never pressured me to move faster than I was comfortable with. We started spending time together, going on long walks, trying new restaurants, and enjoying quiet evenings at home. It was a new kind of love, one built on mutual respect, honesty, and the lessons we'd both learned from our pasts. Alex met my kids, and they adored him, quickly bonding over their shared love of pizza and board games. Alex would often cook for us, turning our dinners into special occasions with his delicious recipes and warm, inviting presence. He brought laughter and joy back into our home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. It wasn't about replacing Mike, it was about creating something new, something healthy, and something that felt right. Our relationship was a fresh start, and it reminded me that love didn't have to be painful or complicated. I didn't need grand gestures or empty promises. I just needed someone who saw me for who I was and loved me anyway. Alex was that person, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Looking ahead, a new chapter. Looking back, I can't believe how much my life has changed. I went from being a heartbroken wife to a strong, independent woman who had reclaimed her power. I had survived the worst, and I had come out the other side with a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. I am grateful for my journey, even the painful parts, because they taught me that I am capable of more than I ever imagined. I am a loving mother, a talented artist, and a resilient survivor who refused to be defined by someone else's choices. I have built a life that I am proud of, and I am excited to see what the future holds.
Thank you for listening, Reddit.
If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we are stronger than we know, and we have the power to rebuild, even after the most devastating betrayals. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but we can choose to rise above, to heal, and to move forward with hope in our hearts.